Welcome, friends, to the Regeneration Podcast, broadcasting live for us, not live for you. Michael, we should do, well, actually, I haven't really thought about it, but I just see the possibility that some night we could go on live and record it, and people could, let's say there was only, like, say, 20, if we advertised it well, 20 people who signed on. That would still be a fun way of doing a show, answering questions,
Yeah, you can do that.
all those possibilities, just doing something live. Anyhow, we're not live. It's Michael Martin, you were saying that you never had this fall break. It's fall break for so many at universities. Indigenous Persons Day, Columbus Day, all those. Regeneration podcast on a cup day, just like my sweatshirt. This might be swag day, my
And
cup.
swag day.
Yeah. My wife just cracks up that our kids now have very easy gifts to give us. That they can just make regeneration and some swag and give it to us, and we're happy with that. I recently told a friend that and she got mad, but she wanted her husband to make her a chicken coop, and he was thinking, oh, it could be working. He's not sure he wanted chickens. Then I said, Tim, there's a win, because once you get somebody their hobby, like it's chickens, or my wife, she started beekeeping this year. It makes every gift so easy. Just buy them a beekeeping mug, a beekeeping sweatshirt, a beekeeping hat. And then the lady got really offended. She's a friend. Maybe she'll listen to this, thinking that was like a too easy or something. And I can stand by it. That the swag I got for my wife with her beekeeping this year was a very, very nice mug and a very, very nice sweatshirt. And she wears it a lot. And again, I enjoyed the regeneration swag my kids make for me.
Same here. Speaking of swag,
Tell me. Here we go.
behold,
The
ladies and
next
gentlemen,
the next issue. Describe the highlights. There's
it's
no
the
lowlights.
Household of Things, Jesus the Imagination, Volume 7, with cover art by the illustrious Catherine Oliver, who's an artist. And actually, she makes films too. You can check her out on YouTube. Look for Catherine Oliver, Catherine, Kathryn. And it's fantastic. And actually, Joan Proudman is on the back, which is a pretty extraordinary piece of digital collage.
Yeah.
And it's got good stuff. Actually, we have, let's see, how many former uh, people we've interviewed here. Let's see.
I heard Guido has one, and you told me.
Lindsay Rose is in here.
Okay, she's great.
Katie Hartsock, who will be interviewing next time.
Poet.
And actually, she is the wife of somebody else. We also interviewed Jonathan Geltner. Also, who else is here? Guido Preparata. He has here's the title of his, the Three Apprentices by the Grimm Brothers.
It is such a scary article. He said it to me.
Gnostic interpretation.
It was really heavy.
Also, I did an interview with Martin Shaw for this one.
Yeah, that's big.
Therese Schroeder-Sheeker. She's also got an article in here, or a story, actually. James Tunney is in here.
Wow. We're going to have him on again soon. What was that topic he mentioned? That anyhow, he's coming up again if you're a James Tunney fan.
Yeah. And we have actually two poems from another person we interviewed, Daniel Polikoff.
Yeah.
And who else is here?
Daniel was Wings of Desire.
Somebody but we didn't interview him. Tyler DeLong is in here.
Yeah. Really good guy.
So it's like we're well represented here.
Yeah. Now, when I link to it, Michael, where do you want me to link to Angelico Press, Amazon?
Yeah, the Angelico Press, because they finally have a way to subvert the machine and not go through Amazon.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah.
Thank you again for doing that. It's a labor of love for you. I know it doesn't put your kids through college, but it's
it hasn't yet. But it is. I mean, I do like doing it, but
yeah, it keeps the fire alive. It keeps the fire alive.
A lot of work, man. Mm-hmm. There's a lot, and it's the Household of Things. So, and it was interesting. I thought I would get a lot of distributist type stuff, and I didn't. I got a lot of
because you beat up on the distributors. Don't you think that's the answer?
No, I was hoping somebody would do something, but I don't beat up on them. I just want them to stop playing Lord of the Rings cosplay.
It's like cutting on people. It's like cutting on people than asking them to come to your party.
Yeah,
but I get it. No, you're just you want them to get a little more down to earth.
But it is down to earth, but it was more about the imagination, surprisingly, in this one.
What's your thought? What's your thought about the this week? I was surrounded a lot by thoughts on the synod of the church, and you're where you are right now vis-a-vis the Catholic Church. I find myself like so many things. I'm going to not precede because we didn't even discuss this topic, but it's when we had uh, uh, first name Clavin on again. Great, Matt Clavin. No,
Spencer Clavin.
Spencer. I'm so sorry, Spencer. And again, we need to have him on again. That was a great conversation. And I was confusing him with his dad, but we were talking about Owen Barfield. And I was thinking of how. And tell me, Michael, if you think this is relevant in his book Speaker's Meaning. And this is something that I think is coming up. It's like those Russian dolls or the microcosm within the macrocosm. And on Columbus Day, Indigenous people, the synod, this whole bottom up thing we talk about so much, bottom up. But he was in the beginning of Speaker's Meaning. He's talking about vis-a-vis the novels of D.H. Lawrence and like our relationship to the body. In that book, he's drawing about, a critical moment we're at that I'm going to use the episode or the issue of crime that he was bringing up that in Britain at that time, they were talking about justice as we still are now. We're working this one out. But it used to be if somebody committed a crime, you just punished them. Now that captured part of the truth, but something that you and I would say the evolution of consciousness. Barfield called it the increasing incarnation of the logos. It's getting more embodied. It's descending further and further. But then all of a sudden you get this other understanding that to this criminal, Sartre in his novel, Camus, you can take somebody who committed a murder, follow them step by step, and you understand it completely. This kid was abused as a child. I was just reading a wonderful article in the journal Plow this morning on friendship. And the author, whose name I forget, I would love to praise it because it's a great article, was saying how, she adopted kids from a kind of a dysfunctional family early, and she surrounded them with love, but they still obviously had problems, right. This thing called trauma. But let's say, we can understand the criminal, but I think we still need law and order. And we have political parties that kind of represent either antithesis of that. But I think we can understand people while also using law and order. But that kind of movement from justice to mercy is something that's going on. And I see this playing out a lot. So the synod, if somebody wanted to say that they thought this whole synod was going to be just kind of run by German bishops on behalf of the St. Gallen group or whatever it need be, they're probably right for all I know. But I also have a sense that the movement from kind of top down to bottom up, there's no going back. There's no going back.
Well, I don't think the synod is actually a bottom up thing. I think it's
no, it's right.
The illusion. It's the illusion of that. It's not that at all.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah.
But hypocrisy is vice paying tribute to virtue.
Well, I think what I think these structures do is they can see the handwriting on the wall, so they try to do an end run and pretend. And I've seen this in college administration. I've seen it in everything. You see it in politics all the time. And this is a classic thing, right? They put on the front that this is, we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. No, we're not. And I don't think it's a bottom up. I think it's a bottom out progression that is the one that's helpful. And but I think, we're kind of conditioned.
Well, describe the bottom out revolution a little bit more then, or maybe that's what you're doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I hear from people, for instance, or just actually heard from somebody just yesterday about doing house church and want to know how we're doing it. And of course, the big thing with house church, when you have a Catholic pedigree, as some people I know, myself, do, is, the Rubicon is the Eucharist. Are you going to do the Eucharist too? Because once you do that, you've crossed the Rubicon, and you're doing the classic Caesar, alea jacta est. The die has been cast, right? Because if you cross that line, there's no going back, right?
Right.
And so so I think so this guy who contacted me yesterday was actually through X or Twitter. He said, "Do you do that?" I did it once, but I felt kind of weird about it. So I understand. It's because we've had a lot of conditioning saying you're going to go to hell,
right?
But but even when I talked, actually, my former priest, and I talked to him about it a while ago, even before I think I did it, and he said, "No, priest, the church doesn't say that, it can't happen that the Eucharist can't happen outside of the church. It only says that the church knows that it does happen inside the church."
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know, that's party line or what is it, but I think I mean, there's the gospel warrant for when there are two or more gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them.
Mm-hmm.
And God's going to play a legalist and throw you out for trying to feed the children, which is what really for us is, anybody who's been following my Substack or my blog for a while knows that a big impetus for this was when under COVID things were closed down and the churches were closed. They closed for Easter, and I didn't see any of
Mm-hmm.
the church leaders pushing back. Not at all. In fact, just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in Rome, Pope Francis made it, or I don't know if he's the one who did it, but he approved it. Certainly, that if you worked at the Vatican, you had to be fully vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
Without knowing what was in that, and so it seemed to be really unconscionable. And if that's the case, and so many churches were closed, and I still have two. Well, I have at the time I had four kids still at home, but two of them were in middle school, like fifth and seventh grade or something like that, or actually even earlier. They were fourth and sixth grade, and I'm like, I can't be on hiatus with their religious
Say
formation.
more about exactly what you're thinking on that stage. So you're saying, that age. Why did that age matter to you? What
Because
exactly? Yeah.
because that's the formative
Mm-hmm. I get
experiences
it. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
of religious life,
Mm-hmm.
you know and I just felt like and it was hard for me to cross the Rubicon, but when eventually I did, it took over a year and a half for me to do that. From
Mm-hmm.
the first, we were just doing like prayer services on the Sundays because I couldn't go to church, and then I got increasingly angrier at the hierarchy for caving, for actually, and this is when we talked to Guido Preparato, right? This is what he's been saying, is that as far as his read on it is that the hierarchy has been pretty much given their marching orders by whether it's a World Economic Forum or whoever, that you guys play by our rules, and we'll stop with the sex scandal stuff. We're gonna let that go away.
Right. Right. Right.
But you gotta support our program, right? And this is what's in Guido's book, Church and Empire, right?
That's right. That's what I see with Pope Francis is like that part of him is this kind of Latin American of a good kind. I mean, there's all these paradoxes. One is that when he seems to be on an airplane, he's just speaking this blend of authoritarianism with kind of a bottom up anarchism, that but and then merged with possibly selling out on the issue of like the main institutional thing might have sounded document, as Guido said. But even in this most recent encyclical, which I read this week, it's critiquing the elites only to talk about something vaguely called multilateralism. So it's not local. And he can't seem to harness the power of the local or the true
Well, he can.
subsidiarity. But he likes bottom up in some way. But you're right. Then there's this you see that he wants to liberate, see, judge, act, bottom up decision making, but on he can use authority so cavalierly at times. I
Well,
confess to
that's the
enjoying
thing,
the whole
right?
show. Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of a joke, right?
yeah.
You can have a black iron cross if you want, but you're still sitting in the chair of St. Peter,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you exert your authoritarianism when it suits you,
Right.
right? And that's the farthest thing from a kind of Christian anarchism. And that's the thing, thinking. So I have to
But I guess I
acknowledge.
think all these things are again birth spasms of whatever is being born in the shell of the new. That we're at this, just like I said, the confusion in our criminal justice system is, we have one faction. I think it's crazy that focuses so much on to understand all is to forgive all, that they don't believe in jails or keeping murderers like, locked up and so forth. But there's no doubt there's this kind of what I don't know, this is Powys who uses Wordsworth, the stream of tendency that, leads towards righteousness or something.
Mhm.
But I do see Pope Francis as one of these transitional figures. Like, what's going to become? Can the See of St. Peter exercise authority? Will it be doing that necessarily? So let's say, like Chesterton's right, this thing is dying. That shouldn't offend much Catholics. But is Pope Francis sowing seeds of discontent, seeds of something else that at least can give us something of the musical register,
Mhm.
so we start building the new in the shell of the old? I
No,
know that's vague. You're saying no. Yeah.
I don't. Well, what I see, what I see that um, it's almost like a controlled demolition.
And make no
You know what I
mistake, I'm
mean?
not saying that he's clairvoyant, like he's playing 5D chess.
No,
Just I want to put that out there. I don't
no,
think
I
that's the
think
case
it's
at
a
all.
controlled demolition that he's doing, and I think it's at. I'm
That's
assuming.
not in total conflict with what I'm saying,
I
either.
know it's
That's
not,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right.
but I think it's not out of pastoral concern. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think. I think it's out of worldly concern. It's
Yeah.
he's he's more and more. And I was, when he first came out, you remember I wrote that guest blog post for Arthur Rossman
Yeah.
when we were still speaking on Laudato Si, right? Which I thought was at the
Like,
time I thought we
what
were
was your
talking.
take again, or what got
No, I
you
thought it
canceled?
was like, in fact, that when I read Laudato Si, I kept looking through the footnotes. I said, "Is this guy quoting me? Where did he get all this
Uh-huh.
thing?"
Right.
And then I found out later that some groups at the Vatican had been studying my work,
Uh-huh.
you know. So I was on my own. Maybe they were. Um, but and I was encouraged. I was encouraged by and I don't mean.
Did this
So
involve you
here's the
getting
thing,
canceled
right?
in
So
any
I'm a
way? Go
I'm a
ahead.
biodynamic farmer and I'm a
Yeah,
sociologist, right?
I get
And
it.
I have, as you know, a very sacred relationship to nature, the
You do.
creation, right? And but that does not mean that I'm the kind of stop oil person's going to glue himself to the to the expressway or to the highway so people can't go to work or even to the hospital, right? And in fact, I hate that, and I think it's evil. Um, but because I think those kinds of gestures support exactly what these assholes who want 15-minute cities and surveillance like you see in London, right?
Mhm.
And that's coming, it's going to be every place before too long, and universal or digital currency,
Mhm.
central bank digital currencies, and they're all pushing for this, right? And they do it under the guise of care or you know safety, just
Safety's big.
just
Yeah.
like the Patriot
Risk.
Act, right?
Hmm.
It's the Patriot Act on hallucinogens.
Yeah.
Um, but and so I like that part in Laudato Si was doing that, but he seems to me over time Pope Francis has become more and more technocratic and more an apparatchik of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, he actually uses. There's a sub chapter in his apostolic exhortation that I think has the headline basically like this, like beating up on the technocratic paradigm. I know the phrase technocratic paradigm is in one sense the enemy in this exhortation. And that's the exact phrase as translated into English. But early on, by giving the whole, I always think again, can't we begin as Catholics with the divine feminine, which again is local and so forth? Can our friend Scott Martin would say, like, know the name of your local watershed.
Yep.
We have a pile of garbage the size of Aruba, like out in the Pacific. These concrete things, let's say 1/3 of California is concrete, whatever these stats are. Or your local stats, what's actually going on. But he spends 3/4 of the document beating up on the technocratic paradigm. But I'm just thinking of young people, and if I was betting at Vegas, they're probably right. There's something called probably man-made global warming accounts for something. I don't know how much, but I know that really good double-blind sciences, of which there's so few, has still not settled this question. A lot of bright young guys would cringe because they go like, when you're going to stake it that this is a non-negotiable, man-made global warming, when a lot of people can say it still could be accounted for in other ways, not that we're not treating the environment horribly. Pope Francis, in this encyclical, gave the keys to the technocrats at the same time as then 3/4 of the rest of the document later is kind of punching at him.
He's speaking outside of both sides of his mouth.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, so I don't, but from you're in my generation, so we remember we were kids and the horror stories and the fear mongering about
They were horror stories, right?
the coming ice age. Remember that? And then
And
the
they were always, they were supposed to happen a long time ago, which is
oh
true.
yeah, we were supposed to be dead by now. And remember Al Gore's Earth in the Balance, that
Yeah.
I think was by 2010 that half the world will be underwater. Well,
The other big one was the Inconvenient Truth, right?
right, and it's all
That was an
bullshit.
Al Gore thing.
And it's all, but I agree that all these things are created to,
Yeah.
Destabilize our security in the world. And I'm not. So put it this way. So if you're talking about net zero or something like this, people don't know shit about actual what carbon dioxide does. And
Right.
and you've seen certain reports that what happened. We live in a closed system. We act like there's
Yeah.
scarcity, that we're going to
Yeah.
use up all the oxygen or something. And it's insane. It's insane because we breathe out carbon dioxide, plants breathe it in, and they breathe out, right? And so the problem for me isn't one of these kinds of things, because I think technocrats use them to try to control us.
Right.
My problem, I, like you said, there's an island of plastic in Aruba, the size of Aruba, floating around the Pacific. So my problem
And
isn't
listeners, I don't know if that's
stuff.
the
My
exact
problem is
thing.
with pollution.
I made that up, but yeah, right.
Pollution's the problem,
Uh-huh.
and
But I
plastic.
also think make it
Here's the thing
concrete as
with
possible for
plastics, right?
everybody. Yeah.
So with plastics, Mike, they make you feel guilty for using plastic, but can you buy anything that's not wrapped in plastic? Even
Right.
wire. So if I go to the hardware store to buy screen, which I've done many, many times, or hardware cloth, it comes wrapped in plastic. Apparently they're afraid it would spoil if it weren't wrapped in plastic. I mean, what the hell? Does it everything need to be plastic? But those are, just those.
Another angle, though, on the same thing
There
is
are
your
ways to
point is
treat.
well taken. Yep.
There
That
there are ways to work with nature that are healthy.
yeah.
For body.
Again, it's not between ecofeminism, like not engaging with nature at all, like Jain Buddhism, avoiding bugs on the, nor is it strip mining, what our friend Philip Sherrard, the great, translator of the Folklia, would call the rape of Mother Nature and so forth. I always want to preface before we use that, but it captures a lot of it. There's this engagement with nature. Which isn't just avoiding it. That's where Bill Bryson, right? He was good in his book, Walking the Appalachian Trail. He noticed that, and I'm not saying it's peculiar to America. It's there in the West, but we have this schizophrenia even more than Europe. But the Appalachian Trail, studiously avoids engagement with any towns. Whereas the Middle Ages, our friend Spencer Clavin was talking about, we look for resources from something that's been gone for a while and we can bring it back. But in Europe, you see how a bridge or an engagement of a nature trail with a town can enhance the beauty of both. We tend to have that schizophrenia in America, that you could only dominate nature or not touch her at all. Right.
Yeah, and that's not a sociological relationship at all.
Neither one is, right.
You have to
dance with nature.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, I mean,
phenomenology.
Well, it's I mean, we act like, and this is the problem, right? What you described, where it's either or. That's Cartesian metaphysics right there, right? That we're somehow outside of nature. We're impartial observers outside of nature. When
if people want, if our listeners, it's we always get, or at least my kids and some students at the college will say, link books more, all the stuff we don't and probably will never do unless we hire somebody or we could bring in big bucks. Anyhow, there's a chapter in Owen Barfield's book on Coleridge, just that gets into outness, and so people get kind of the Cartesian thing that you're mentioning, but just the whole, like the importance of that whole notion that there's like, I always beat up on Archimedes, as that he seems to be the godfather of this sense that we can extricate ourselves from the universe to comment on it from a hermetically sealed distance where we have objectivity, as
Right.
opposed to coming out of our mother's womb surfing. I like the image of surfing or sailing. But when this notion of outness after the Cartesian Revolution really settled in, Owen Barfield's chapter on outness in his book What Coleridge Thought is just
Right.
one of these genius chapters in all of literature.
Yeah, and I think Barfield is correct. To start have the Romantic poet as his kind of starting off point, because that's exactly. In fact, I mentioned the last time we talked. I've been doing a lot of research into German Romanticism because I'm supposed to write an introduction on Novalis's Christianity or Europe in spiritual songs, and these guys, the more I didn't realize how much, because I never researched it this deeply. And usually I would pay attention to the English romantics, not the Germans as much. But they were like us. They wanted to repair that broken relationship with nature.
They did. Yeah.
That had been, and the thing is, for them, and this, you see this in Goethe, but you see it in Novalis, see it in Schelling,
Right.
is that repair of our broken relationship with nature is unthinkable without a repair of our broken relationship with God.
One other angle, if people are trying to do spiritual, we once talked about spirituality of like the 4 directions and so forth and things you could do. But I would say here's another spiritual discipline connected to that outness of nature. And it's something you and I would have in common. So when I describe it, Michael, you'll understand it. But our common friend Berdyaev, he labeled himself an anti-consequentialist, right? Meaning he just thought that like moral decisions weren't based on what you thought could happen from them. Because he knew that, as my dead friend Stephen Vizenci, this novelist I've mentioned so many times in his book called The Rules of Chaos, we have much less control over the future than we think. So again, that goes back to Archimedes in the sense of to be able to be outside the universe.
Right.
Once you let go of that ontological fiction and realize we are surfing, you actually, this spirituality of the present moment, this Marian spirituality of the present moment, and this not trying and just doing the right thing because it's what you should do, not trying to play moral chess that I'm going to like dam up this river or poison this river so I can get more food. Just don't poison rivers. Kennedy's assassin said, I did it for my country. No, just don't kill people. This whole moral revolution takes place. And the key language from Vizenci that I love so much is in a chaotic world, moral decisions are the only rational ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the evil we do in this world is because of the domino theory of history. We have to kill a lot of Vietnamese because if Vietnam goes communist, the whole rest of Southeast Asia will. Well, how do we know? It takes a lot of people. Stendhal proved when he looked at the French Revolution. It's a lot of things have to happen at the same time,
Well,
and so history is chaotic. But there's this idea of realizing daily the spiritual discipline that we can't get outside of this universe, that again, we came from our mom's womb and we've been figuring it out the whole time. And we're just fellow journeyers of other people who are trying to figure it out. It takes a revolution in your thinking. You're very much prone to live in the present moment, I find.
yeah, and I think what you see, these, well, we're gonna have net zero, we're gonna save the planet, right? Or we're gonna whatever the project du jour is to save the planet. It's a messiah complex, right?
Yeah.
It's hubris.
Yeah.
It's hubris writ large, you know, and and it's very often promoted by these technocrats.
Yeah.
Who don't, they don't really care about the environment.
Mm-hmm.
You see all this stuff when they go to Davos and they're all flying their private jets and they're eating whatever they're at, lobster or whatever, and they're planning for us to eat bugs and not have cars.
Yeah.
Who can buy that for even
Yeah.
for a second, right?
Yep.
And but it's absolutely hubris, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote about this. I knew this was coming. I wrote about it in Transfiguration, which was 5 or 6 years ago.
And you're right in line with again Illich, who said, the ultimate blasphemy is this blasphemy of life, by looking at the paradox of that image of the Earth as seen from outer space, and the image of a baby seen, in utero. He just obsessed on those.
Mm-hmm.
That when we look from the outside and say this is life, so you have the scientists on one side, but you have the priests, a certain form of priesthood on the other side. The baby is life,
Mm-hmm.
life. But in both cases, it's giving technocrats control of that definition, right? And that whole notion, it forced him to say to hell with life, because this view of outness that you were just describing so well. It's gotten so far that whether you do it in the name of science or religion, there's this way of objectifying life so that you can mess with it. And there's
Mm-hmm.
another way of being, within this thing, seeing or Blake points us in the direction, seeing the whole universe as a human body.
Well, that's it. I mean, how to bring that holistic vision of what it is to be human back, making that central, and not the master slave dialectic that we're getting from all the other that's what the technocrats are actually doing.
Yeah.
They dress it up in different kinds of language, but that's what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
But and so I think the people who think they're radical out there aren't radical enough.
No.
Because and this is what I see. I mean, especially I see this in the church, which yeah. Um, everything's poisoned by politics.
Yeah.
And nobody has, or very few people have, the imaginative and moral fortitude to look at, like you said, the present moment, but actually to live in being now.
Yeah.
And nobody has that because they have to check it with the tradition, or they have to check it
Yeah.
with the political, proclivities or whatever. They got to check in, right? But no, very few people have that kind of radical imagination or daring
Mm-hmm.
to actually look and see what's there. And it's a trap, and it's such a trap that it's so hard to escape for some people, for most people, like not almost all people. It's so,
Yeah.
so difficult because it's easier to not do that.
It is. And then again, but it has, as you and I both know, unless we're lying to ourselves, our friend who we're going to have on next week, we thought he might be joining us today, Adam Smith. Remember what he said during COVID? He just kind of woke up.
Mm-hmm.
He just had bought the whole thing until that moment. And I want to be with him at that moment because I'm wondering, again, I think it was this guy, Stephen Vizenchi, when my mom was dying. And I'd never, I mentioned on our last episode that I never went to class in college and I didn't read, or it was when we were talking to Spencer Clavin, that I didn't get this whole thing about the intellectual life until like 23. But I don't know if I drank the Kool-Aid. I just didn't read anything. I was just hanging out with my friends for all those years. So that the flip side is I never read a textbook that like bored me. So when I took to it, I just like took to it like flies to shit. But
Mm-hmm.
but I'm wondering, the way you were just discussing again, what are we doing? What can liberate people? One idea for me is, I mentioned the name Powys a lot, John Cooper Powys, but there's a pretty short novel, and it's weird, I have to admit. It's called Morrowind, but he takes a Dantesque journey, this guy, into the underworld. And he meets really cool people there. But it's a sustained novel where he has science and religion. I always think about we need a religionless church because this danger of religion is kind of hypertrophied when we're desiccated from our hospitals and schools. It's
Right.
just like of the OCD, for the OCD, by the OCD.
Mm-hmm.
And so one way that could liberate us beyond some of these mental shackles is he always talks about, like, he has Kelvin and a research scientist, so one, the people who, the church who adores the past, the scientists who torture in the name of the future. The church tortures in the name of the past, but it's religion and science. And he sees all these kind of, enemies looking at each other, secretly friends on other sides. So he has Kelvin, who's in predestination, but with the scientist, he has the determinist, right?
Yeah.
And he shows how these things, and he's got 50 million of those. He points out this infernal dance. And you and I would see that they were both religions. But I think whether it's science or religion, we have to release ourselves, and this is where Blake might be the greatest prophet, but what he called the manacles, right?
The Mind Forge Manacles, right?
Right,
Well,
right.
this is Gurdjieff too, as you mentioned
It
earlier, right?
is. It is. Yeah.
I mean, this is a big theme through all of his work, slavery and freedom,
You'll
right?
have to read Powys on Gurdjieff if nothing else,
I have to.
because it is so wild. It is like, again, you would just love it. Like your two best friends were going at it, and they loved each other. But Powys was fascinated with Gurdjieff. He would just read him crossing the country, the whole U.S. on trains back and forth, and he wondered about this new thing he had discovered. And he's very favorable, but it's also probably the most perceptive criticism. One of the highlights for me in 20th century theology, seeing Powys engage Gurdjieff.
I have to check that out for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and that's, I probably, I don't know if I became like I am because of Gurdjieff, or I got into Gurdjieff because I am like I am. But I mean, he's a person who had that kind of radical daring and imagination. He and Blake, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Do
Truly anarchistic in spirit, but like this huge heart, right? They both
well, not only
similar
that, but
personalities.
I mean, Berdyaev's, I mean, he never left the Orthodox Church,
Mm-hmm.
but my God, what a scathing critique of the ossification of the system
Right.
he exists in his work, right? And this cry, and he, I've quoted a lot of times where, he wondered, this is the 1930s, because of the condition of Christendom, if this thing called Christianity is really at an end.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I know it's not because, I believe that, Christ will be with us till the end of the age. But I got to think, on the other hand, it looks like it's over.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this iteration, like think of, I'm going to go back to the synod for a second, but a hero of mine, we should do a whole, I don't know what scholar we would have on in after the French Revolution. I think after the Social Contract in the Bible, the most read book was an essay on indifference. I think it was three volumes, and it was by a brilliant young Félicité de Lamennais, a French. And he just thought somehow democracy, this new thing that had happened in the revolution, that he saw the evil of the revolution. How many people were tortured and killed in Paris alone? The streets, as Mary Wollstonecraft saw herself, the streets were running red with blood. But he also knew that something had been unleashed that was going to have to be incorporated. Long story short, he writes this essay. He writes all these provocative things. If anybody can find it online, and you can, read his gnomic, brilliant book called Words of a Believer that can fill you with hope right now. Anyhow, he had two full papal encyclicals written against him in particular, but that church had to die. Now it's everything we take for granted in the church. It was all there in Vatican II. So during this time of polarization in the church, the Rads and the Jim Martin types, that this church can reinvent itself in wild ways, and not disagreeing with you at all, Michael. We just don't know. I think this Father Ed who we had on, he had a friend who he thought was the greatest Vaticanologist in his generation. So Father Ed's about around 90 years old. So this other guy was a classmate over in Rome, same time, but had followed it closely. The book is online. It's called The Last Pope, one of these things, but it's not like a Malachi Martin thing. But he's talking about this time. He gets it well. And if the church knew it was horribly cornered, like Guido says, and it's just playing to the tools of the elites, it was well portrayed. But at the end, this fake pope, I think his name was Daniel, and not a fake pope, the last pope, he tried to change it, but right before he was assassinated, he had written a talk or gave a talk. But what he did is he sold all the Vatican buildings to like the UN. Now that's a horrible take at the last couple of pages, right?
Yes, it
It's
is.
a really but up till that, the novel was great. But he used his power to kind of devolve. Here's Adam. This is great. This is going to be a great segue because it's so easy.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Adam, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Great.
Let's put my video on here.
Tell me, you can throw me under the bus because I deserve it. I didn't have an in-between confirming email to you. We had agreed that Monday would work for you. It did for me. I thought I'd confirm with Michael, or did you have? Because I'm guilty, but you might have had.
I don't remember. I don't remember, and I also I'm sure you probably reminded me of the time zone change too, and I forgot about that.
Oh, so. I did not.
Okay,
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
I just got back from class, so I wouldn't have been able to do it before anyway. So
you know what I'm going to do, Michael, is I can break this video. My son will help me into two. We've been talking for a little while, Adam.
Okay, yeah.
And there's going to be a segue. So like we might welcome people back to the Regeneration podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
Michael and I were talking about things from like the bottom up. We were talking about the church and even the synod. Yeah. But Adam, I'm so glad you're here. You've been on the show before. And I want to begin because this will tie in the people who are listening to the conversation we just had. We want to talk about a few things with you today. Mm-hmm. And Michael, do you have at least another 45 minutes or an hour? Do you, Michael? Because we want at least that time with Adam. The rereading your review at Front Porch on Patrick Deneen's book, and then your second one, which I see, and you were an engaged reader on something I did for just my own mind to clear myself, kind of 3 essays on the future of religion. But when I reread those reviews today, they were subtle. They're great. Your insights are so profound. I wanted to say, like, who are you reading that you can see these things so clearly? But first of all, if nobody told you clearly that our listeners need to read these if you're interested in the post-liberal thing, you're engaging Patrick Deneen, who might be the best known name, and nobody has equaled your thinking on this, bar none, as far as
thank you.
As far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Completely, totally, and singular. Michael, you read the. I've got a bunch of questions, but you read the review certainly of the Deneen book. You know how to shoot from the hip. What was your engagement with that, Michael? So the first question for Adam.
Well, first of all, I love the article. Second thing, what the hell happened to Pat Deneen?
A lot of people are asking that. Yeah,
because he did not. I mean, because I when I got on Facebook, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. I used to, interact with him occasionally. He seemed like a pretty smart guy who didn't seem to have extreme views. And I thought he was a pretty clear thinker. But then I haven't gotten this turn over the last few years with him and who are those other guys?
The post-liberal
posse. Yeah.
The guy at Catholic University.
Yeah.
The Augustine
Gladden Papin is one of them.
Well, Gladden Papin and then the theologian, Chad Pecknold.
Yeah.
All very smart guys, yeah.
Yeah, they're smart guys, but I don't get it. Seems like a kind of Catholic triumphalism, which I don't get. And it seems like, in fact, when I read your article, Adam, where you're saying, it's not that they don't like the system. They don't like the guys who are running it now. So it's like, those guys are assholes. We want to put our assholes in instead. And
that's my basic read.
But you do break it down so well. You do break it down.
Doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't get any of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, Adam. I say, I'm probably more conservative and more radical than those guys because what are you doing?
And when you answer, Adam, include your distinction between rights and values. I think it's a key.
Yeah, that is really key. Let me real quick shut my office door.
Absolutely.
It might get loud, people.
Yeah.
The post-liberals are going to come and take them down.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think there are any post-liberals in my university, so I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, rights and values. I think that's really, I have the review of Deneen's book, followed up by a review of Danielle Allen's book, and I think it really comes.
It's a must-read to read them both. Absolutely,
it really is. And it comes through really well when you read the two together. Maybe when you read my two reviews together, it's especially. But each of them works with the other.
No, I was saying your reviews together. I mean, but again, they are what you do is this is a 1-2 punch. Hopefully, you have a third or more coming. But it's so.
I there's plenty to read on this, and you can do a whole series of. But I think. Let's see. It's a huge topic. Post-liberalism is a huge topic these days. I was listening just yesterday to a podcast with John Gray, the political philosopher.
He's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, really brilliant. And
I didn't know he's still alive.
Yeah, he's still alive. He made a joke about that actually in the podcast, how he's about dead. But what was he saying? He was kind of lamenting the fall of liberalism. It's basically it's over. Liberalism is over. Part of that is the idea that liberalism is or was this era when it was possible to have open debate with people you really disagreed with, but now we have all this censorship, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that one of the things that has been the death knell is moving all political issues into the realm of rights, where you can't, once you declare something a right, as opposed to a value over which you might, have a contestation, you take it out of the political realm altogether. And I think that's what Deneen recognizes, and it's why he calls for, the rise of a post-liberal order, because that's what liberalism has done. It's kind of an anti-politics. And even a liberal like Allen also recognizes the same thing, that liberalism has kind of, made a mistake.
And 1 minute on rights too is just to say that, like, we talk about Simone Weil a lot, but she's just one thinker, and I'm not saying that she's the only one, but just new, even rights talk for those haven't, obviously this is second nature to you, Michael and Adam, but like, some people just look at rights and say, like, where are they? How, where do they, do they exist? This would be Simone Weil in the absence of human obligations. She would say we can't even talk about them without talking about how they're met. Other people would say they're infinitely malleable. The people, and this is to your point in your reviews, that the people who just deem rights, they're infinitely malleable. So I could extend it to the right to have sex with my dog. It's language, but just, to break that down a little bit, rights and values, why they're so dangerous.
I mean, it's the progression, and I use that word kind of, advisedly, where more and more things are considered rights, shows you the danger that you're talking about. It shows you that malleability. The word is like a black box. You can just put everything you want into it. As soon as you can stuff it in, then nobody can tell you not to do it anymore. I mean, I think we see that, like, that's people accuse people who worry about that kind of thing of the slippery slope fallacy, which is ridiculous, since you can see that we're at the bottom of the slippery slope right now. But yeah, I mean, the proliferation of rights, I think that the key point that Gray was making is that the proliferation of rights is one of the really clear death knells of liberalism, because once you have everything categorized as a right, then you no longer have that kind of open space where you can debate, where you can talk. And if that was the hallmark of liberalism, it's not compatible once everything is reduced to a right, which then must be policed by the state to make sure no other people are violating the rights, and so on. So, I mean, I think that's easy enough to recognize, I guess.
And Deneen does a great job, you're saying.
Yeah, and he does.
He does. Right.
He does do a great job. And even liberals like Allen can also recognize that maybe we've messed a few things up here, and we've invited the populist backlash, because a lot of that backlash is directed at this anti-politics, where everything is reduced to something that can be administered by experts. But I guess what I was trying to get at is, in my review of Deneen and my thoughts about post-liberalism in general, is, this is a long debate in political theory: rights versus values, which one has priority over the other. I tend to take the side of the critics of liberalism. I think that you can't talk about rights in the abstract. I mean, this is, I think, probably what Vey's partly getting at. You have to have some kind of concrete values in order to make those kinds of things real. You can't have a right to do something that is bad, I guess, is the way that would be, you might talk about it. So maybe values have to come first. But I also recognize with the liberals that kind of thing is dangerous, because once you start talking about values, then it can have basically the same effect. Deneen and Pecknold and those guys, they've got their Catholic values, and their idea seems basically to be we're going to impose those on everybody else. And there's going to be no debate about it. And they would say something like, look, liberals are pretending to be neutral, to not have any kind of commitments to values. They do. We have commitments to different values. We're just being open about it. Politics is a contest to see who is going to be able to impose their values on
It's so
Everybody
Bush.
else,
Yeah.
yeah. And
It's
the
so
question is to get the right values. So it's a dangerous moment to be in politically, because the liberals really have gone really far in reducing everything to rights, but the reaction to that could just be the mirror image of it, and it could do all the things in post-liberal terms that I don't like that liberals do. So
that reminds me. So I mean, so Mike and I are interested in um, facets of distributism,
mm-hmm.
and, but here's the thing though. So I can't remember how it came up, but I was interacting with somebody on social media who was a self-proclaimed distributist,
Mm-hmm.
the classic type, and I was wondering, how could an alternate to the way we have our politics set up right now and our economics be feasible,
Mm-hmm.
through a kind of why can't distribute, why doesn't nobody else experiment with distributist principles? And
Mm-hmm.
basically his idea was, well, we can't do that until everybody goes to the Latin mass. Oh my God, shoot me.
That is a real
And
thing. That is a real thing. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't believe, like, what the hell am I talking to this guy for?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that goes to
Yeah.
your point, Adam, in the
But
essay
that's
too.
that's what
Yeah.
Deneen and co are
Right.
doing,
Right. Yeah.
essentially, right?
They are. And that's
Yeah.
when
I
you
mean,
talk about the cathedral, Adam, that,
mhm,
if it sounds like it's just a brutal takeover of politics to say
mhm,
do it our way,
mhm,
it can be softened by saying, oh no, we want to raise the culture of the world, have the schools, the universities and everything.
mhm,
But where at least Michael and I know you and Tara would be sympathetic, there's two things. One is you point out that those institutions swallowed those people.
mhm,
Radicals wanted to change the universities, and
mhm.
they became tools of those
Oh
institutions.
yeah, my
And the
God.
other one is that, again, we need to um, we don't need to alter things like hospitals or universities. We need to change them fundamentally.
Mhm,
That's regeneration of all these institutions. Say
mhm.
more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, another thing we might end up talking about is what I'm trying to do about technology
Yeah,
on
it's a
campuses, things
huge
like
part of
that.
your reviews. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it relates to this point, I think, in a strange way. The McLuhan line is the medium is the message.
Mm-hmm.
Institutions are mediums. I mean, they are things that contain messages. Like there's sets of rules,
That's the
incentives.
central Illichian insight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's this tendency, this weird kind of tendency among the post liberals who I actually think should know better, that to forget that, to think along with the liberals as if institutions are these neutral containers, and that the problem is that they've been stuffed with bad values that have been disguised as rights. Okay, I kind of agree that that's something that can happen, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they've been stuffed with these bad values, so we can just take those values out, stuff them with the right values, and then things will work out. I just don't think that that's how we should be thinking about institutions at all, especially these days when the massive size of institutions makes it obvious what their independent effects are on people, regardless of those people's values.
Well,
Um,
and let me ask you this, Adam, because it
mhm,
seems to me, and Mike and I were talking about this earlier, that there's a captured quality
mhm,
to liberal institutions like the colleges and universities,
mhm,
and I think it's by design.
mhm,
And it's the same thing. It also mirrors the design of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. So you have assistant professor,
mhm,
deacon,
mhm,
associate professor, priest, full
mhm,
professor, bishop.
mhm,
But both of those systems are orchestrated to weed out the troublemakers, right?
mhm, mhm,
And not only do they weed out the troublemakers, but they encourage conformity because whoever goes along gets along, right?
mhm, mhm,
And we find ourselves in a unique problem right now. In fact, when I was at Marygrove College before their untimely demise, but they deserved their demise, um, the English department where I was at a Catholic liberal arts college, there was almost nobody who was Catholic.
mhm,
In fact, it was very hostile to the very idea of being Catholic in this institution because they had gradually just kind of compromised
mhm,
themselves into a realm in which they have they have no values and they have only rights.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
and it's only this certain set of rights,
yeah,
right?
yeah, you
And
can definitely see that you can see a perfect example in the the transformation of institutions that were once committed to a set of values into institutions, the only purpose of which seems to be to make sure that certain rights, which may be local rights to that institution, that everybody's supposed to have, are not being trampled on. And we talk about our mission or something in terms of education, but really it seems a lot like our mission is mainly
social
conceived of
engineering.
as legalistic terms. But that's an effective institutions. That's not an effective having the wrong values. So if we have values, they should lead us to think about institutions in a certain way, not just to look around for some institutions that we can take over so that we can put those values into practice. Is maybe how I would put it. But I think there's a blindness to that. So
yeah, and again, like, is this it's Michael and I were talking again, the notion of I might this time earlier, Adam, I was just mentioning it's in Owen Barfield's Speaker's Meaning. It begins with, the previous notion, just justice, you punish criminals. Two, we do admit there's something of an awakening to see that criminals are human and so forth. He saw that civilization at that time, in kind of Steiner's evolution of consciousness, was caught between that pole of maybe justice and mercy. That, we were seeing that criminals, but again, it gets polarized, or I don't mean polarized at all. It gets really viral when it's tied to a scientist or determinist worldview, that if somebody had these events, it causes them to do something. But there was that we're teasing these things apart. But when we talk about the post-liberal phenomenon, if we were talking about something that I would say, from justice to mercy, or from, in the Catholic Church, from hierarchy, kind of authoritarianism to synodality, we were talking about this current synod going on. These are some messy times for those two. Do you think like that? Like, what do you bring to bear on your thinking? You experienced your understanding during COVID. You woke up to something. What metaphysical framework do you use to look at these questions so that you can question the post-liberals, but you intuit there's another way?
Boy, that's a question that I am trying to answer.
I think it might be the question of the Regeneration podcast. We're trying to work this out. I do a lot with the overworld and the underworld. In the underworld, the overworld's clear. It has simple ways. The underworld is working out problems. The darkness mixed with light, the divine feminine. And we need ways of solving things. So Jordan Peterson, I was talking with my son, came out pretty simplistic on some current events, I think. And that he loves Jung, but he can only see hierarchy. He's never really worked with the shadow. So it's Jung talk it's underworld talk that they keep in the overworld. But and that it makes Jordan Peterson seem just so tinny on certain issues. He can blow you with some thought about Jung, but Jung, he had explored the depths, things like that. I guess, these are atmospheric. But you've written with Tara and so forth, and she explores this same terrain. But Michael's always saying, how did these post-liberals, where did they come from? Talk about to understand all is to forgive all. It's a pretty simple
1950s. That's where they came
I know,
from.
but it would be. But even with first things, you had the naked public square. We were just starting to think that maybe the public square had its own thought content to begin with. That we were waking up. That I'm kind of forgiving if a young college student came to me and ended up in the post-liberal paradigm. I'd say I'm fortunate to have a student that's thought thus far. Now let's work with it.
Yeah. I mean, on that last thought, I would totally agree with you. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the emotion behind the drive toward post-liberalism, definitely. And whenever I have, I guess I would try. I mean, I haven't done some kind of study, but my sense is that more and more of my students, I mean, my thoughtful students who think about anything at all, but more and more of my thoughtful students are that. I don't know. I have this one student. He was in a class last semester, and he took to.
I love your smile already. It's going to be a great story.
Well, he's a very precocious guy. This is very weird. Nobody else would do this, but and maybe you had to be there or something. But he took to prefacing every intervention in class, anything he was about to say. He took to prefacing it simply by saying, and it was totally, non sequitur. Also, fairies are real. And then he would go on and talk about his thing, right?
I like that kid. Yeah.
And I thought, I bet there's
Really
this
funny.
fairly well-known essay by David Bentley Hart, and I think it's in First Things, where he talks about fairy. I'll bet he's read that, and he's kind of thinking about that.
Actually use that essay for teaching students.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really fun essay. I really like it, and I sense among my students this weariness with the liberal order, with the liberal order, and with the kind of everything turned into an institution, like a husk of itself.
And they, again, shorthand is they don't trust the institutions. God bless them for it.
Yeah, they don't trust them, and that's great. And exactly.
I've seen the same thing. In fact, I just taught that essay maybe 2 weeks ago, and I asked this, and it's really well written. I mean, David Bentley Hart knows how to write.
Oh yeah,
I mean, he's combative as all hell, but he knows how to write, and it's very well written. In fact, I just edited a book by him. Hardly anything to fix because he's so perfection. But and that essay on the Secret Commonwealth. Then I finally said, we're trying to unpack how he structured this essay, what kinds of tools he's using. And I said, okay, here's the thing. Do you believe fairies exist? And they're like looking around. I don't know. Should I raise my hand? And the kids said, no, absolutely not. But they're like, am I really in college? This guy. Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is I think what we're suffering under right now, maybe that Deneen doesn't even realize it. We're suffering from what I could call the technocratic enlightenment, right? The high tech enlightenment, and and the response to that is this form of romanticism.
Yeah,
which is making a case for the imagination and truth and beauty and goodness again. Right. And I do see it with some students, like you said, not everybody, but they're out there.
Yeah. And that reaction is really important. I mean, in my mind, there's always, a thesis and an antithesis, and the hope is for synthesis, and that process, goes on potentially forever. That's maybe too simplistic an understanding of the process, but I see that reaction and I welcome it, although I fear what it might avoid. I fear that it might not lead to some good place.
And you say Deneen's whole book is kind of theologically or politically deaf to Heidegger and the technological question.
Very much so. Very much so. And that's
say a little bit about
that
too.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I definitely thought about that. I mean, there's a lot of good work being done on technology right now. Thinking about technology in a very fundamental way, and then trying to relate that to more surface level political questions that we have. I mean, John Askinus is working on this. I don't know if you've read any of his.
I saw your review.
Yeah. I think.
Well, you linked to an essay of his. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was linked to an essay of his. I think that one of the reasons why I don't resonate so much with Deneen's work is probably because I'm trying to think about those issues, and I don't see him thinking about those issues. But back to your question, though, about I don't know, how do I think about this
metaphysically?
Yeah. I mean, I am giving a talk at the Front Porch Republic Conference this month. The end
you
of
and Paul Kingsnorth,
that's right. Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to meet him. Actually, it's going to be really fun. Hopefully, I'll be there. My third baby is due also at the end of the month, so
it's an easy decision to make. It sounds hard, but when it's
I mean, it depends
go for the
on the
baby.
timing.
Choose the baby every time, right?
Yeah, obviously,
I'll did it twice fine without me.
Obviously, I'll be there for the birth over Paul.
Grace an hour later, sure.
Yeah. Hopefully, I can do both though. But
anyway,
the title of my talk is "The Politics of Reenchantment," and I haven't written it yet, so I don't know what I'm going to say. But my first thought is like, I'm a weird person to give this talk.
You're not. You're the one we need to hear. Go ahead.
this, I don't know if this is an honest way to describe myself or not, actually, but um, Jürgen Habermas once said that, or maybe it was Habermas, some German theorist, said something like that he was not religiously musical. Like, people don't have an ear for music, so he didn't have an ear for religion, something like that.
I don't, and I work for the church.
Well, sometimes I feel like that. Sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like I don't really have an ear for the metaphysical or something.
Uh-huh.
But on the other hand, I feel like that's not true, because I have a very strong reaction to and a distaste for that kind of technocratic enlightenment that you were talking about, Michael. And also I have to say that as I've gotten older, certain things have happened, COVID, things like that. I have become much less kind of dogmatic about what is and is not real. And I've become much more confused about the exact distinction between the literal and the figurative, for example. Haven't figured that out yet. But anyway, I think I'm probably not the only person who, it doesn't seem like I'm the only person who feels some kind of pull of reenchantment and doesn't exactly know how to describe it, or whether you're just kind of making it up in your own mind or something. But it seems important, and it also seems somehow connected to all this stuff that I was already interested in, political theory kind of questions, liberalism and post-liberalism. There seems to be something afoot, basically.
Let's stay with this a second, because I don't know. Yeah, I was going to say, even before you started speaking there, and we mentioned Paul Kingsnorth, who I greatly, greatly admire. But you're a more dangerous thinker than he is, I believe. You are. And it has to do with this notion. There's a quintessential moment where, again, he had all this kind of like leaven that you're feeling in so many areas, leaven. And then he kind of, in my vision, he swapped it down in front of an iconostasis and language like my spiritual father tells me to, not eat meat like 3 days a week. And for somebody who works for the church, it just strikes me as funny and maybe like a great dissipation.
Yeah.
And again, those practices can be really wonderful. I just watched the movie Father Stew the other day, and I thought that if anybody's seen it, Mark Wahlberg, it would be this kind of church as machine, but I needed to see it again, because it could be, if it worked, somebody on hard times kind of loved the rigor of, fasting and needed that order and so forth, like a kid from pretty cool. But and I needed to hear it. I can be too weak not seeing the value of that structure sometimes. But I still think it's fading and it's crashing like the university system or the hospital system.
Yeah.
So like, what are we going to do? Let's just admit it's crushing. But can you say a little bit about that transition point, as they now say they use it too much, this inflection point?
Yeah.
Do you feel that with your journey? I remember during COVID, you gave me the language I was searching for. You wrote an essay on trying to go to church. That captured so much. Can you hang around that atmosphere a little bit?
Yeah. I'm really, I feel that tension that you're describing, right? Like the kind of on the one hand, a draw toward enchanting things, the ancient tradition and the all the stuff, the paraphernalia that seems, cool, I guess, to somebody who grew up like me in a evangelical church where the sanctuary was just an auditorium, and you might as well have felt like you were in a corporate retreat or something like that, right? So I can feel that kind of, but I also recognize how easy it is to identify that with the thing you're looking for, or the enchantment that you think is out there, in which case you end up just repeating the same mistake, which is to turn it into like a machine. Like you said, I guess
kind of idolatry, right?
Yeah.
This is the quintessential thing. Stay there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's anything new. I think that this is a perennial problem for humans. How to give form to something without imprisoning it, without turning it into something else. I think that on the one hand, most people, I'll put it like that, most people need some kind of concrete form. On the other hand, there's always this danger in any concrete form. It's just the relate. I would say that this is the relationship between law and grace.
It is.
That is, so central in Paul's writings in the New Testament in particular. And maybe my impulse is to say something like there's a historical waxing and waning here, where there are ages where we're building up forms, and then there are ages where the forms become so obviously corrupted and so legalistic that the grace gets lost. And then people go looking for that grace, and it's a dangerous time, but also an opportunity, because things are going to get destroyed, which is good because they're bad, but also then I think people do need some form, but that form is always dangerous.
Yeah, I think, when I mentioned dangerous, see, you're dangerous and I'm insane maybe, because, I get the waxing and the waning, and I get the cycles, but, I've taken the risk. And again, Adam, it's fun to think that you're actually a very sensitive reader of my own kind of insanity on Front Porch. But and again, like, when I saw that blog, a really intelligent person that started with Tara, and I would see your name with comments, and I hadn't seen your writings at Front Porch. I never made the connection. But I just completely lost my train of thought on that. I'll come back to it. There was something. Okay. Yeah, it's the whole thing. It would be the Illich. Oh, it would be, so in my writings, I mentioned that, we have those, it's like Oswald Spengler is true up to a point, unless we move from the age of Pisces to the age, I want to make something like that. We're in the third movement of the symphony. The opening harmony, then you have the discord. Then, we're not going to stay in all of the fluctuations of discord. We're looking for some type of merging of East and West, of the male and the female, and, a movement towards the underworld. So, I wonder, when I hear you saying that kind of like the receding and so forth, I wonder if so what I think today, the language is going to come to me, when we had like Lee Ogeron, he's got a book on great Shakespeare scholar. He's got a book on Christianity and Jesus, or like Shakespeare and Christianity. But we don't need to know if Shakespeare was Catholic. We don't need to know if Cervantes was Catholic. We don't need to know if Rabelais was Catholic, but we need like the religion of Rabelais. We need the religion of Cervantes, the religion of Shakespeare. What did those guys do? And again, I think we need to flip the script. Instead of saying this ritual stuff, it gets hypertrophied. We need, and maybe this is a waxing and a waning. Maybe Jesus dressed, blessed bread and wine, because he knew our tendency to turn everything into kind of hocus pocus. He gave us that simple thing, like, again, when kids walk to the post office and they don't step on the cracks, and things like that. That's a little impulse. Yeah. And, that's kind of the way I'm leaning right now. Again, this marriage between the earthborn common sense tradition that has humor, that if we're going to take something, let's focus on the equality of all souls. And this notion that I think is true for you for political theory. Your work captures the notion of just the love of some people to put it over on somebody else, to feel above and press down on other people. Yeah. Those are the evils of our time. That's why I would call myself something of an anarchist.
Yeah. I mean, that, I guess, two thoughts. So, the language of waxing and waning, the idea that they're historical periods, and then trying to figure out for yourself what time you're in, that kind of thing, is very interesting and useful in its way. And it is it's true that I think it's true that it's a perennial problem, the relationship between law and grace, form and content, if you want to put it that way. But I guess the question is, what does that mean in a specific circumstance where you're deciding, what to do, like whether to do house church like you are doing, Michael, or whether to attend this church or that church, or whatever specific decisions you've got to make in your real life. The kind of moral practical stuff where you yourself are putting form and content together in a particular way. Is there some like rule that tells you how to do it? Well, then you're kind of back to the other problem, which is, you too many rules, like a rule for a rule for a rule. Is there no rule? Can you just do it however you want to? Well, then it's formless. And is it actually going to, be useful to you in your life? Is it going to be morally kind of significant, I should say, not useful in your life? I don't know. So that's tricky. philosophically tricky to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Practically speaking, what I'm drawn to now is kind of maybe what you were getting at, Mike, which is maybe the mistake that I most strongly react to in the post-liberals is their idea that the way we fix all these problems, the way we kind of get over the technocratic enlightenment is to do big stuff. You know, we take all the big institutions and put our people in. We need some like big solutions.
Mm-hmm.
The cathedral.
Yeah, there's a cathedral there. We got to put our people in charge of the cathedral. And I guess I would like to say that if there's like a politics of enchantment that is salutary instead of a waste of time or a LARP, then it's got to be focused on small everyday things. That's why I'm attracted to localism. I would put it in that way. Mm-hmm. Like the reenchantment of the common stuff rather than the reenchantment that is like the big sexy idea about what time of history you're in or something. I think it's better. It's better to look around you and to think about what the meaning of this matter is, not to get obsessed with your time in history or something abstract. So that might be where my talk at the end of the month goes. Something like a good politics.
I think I've been trying in my own thought to put you right there, like, you know, with all that stuff. That question is kind of like why you're here, but you know that again, that's the stuff that I would put. That's an epical change. That's 2,000 years of history from the overworld to the underworld, the local. You know, and I think if you might agree with me, writing for Front Porch, we need localism is one key part. But what Illich brought to conversations was not just the local, but the more complicated issue of scale. Some things are done well at a large scale.
That's true.
And that's the thinking of Leopold's, you know, core, that he said, you know, there's only one problem with everything. It's called bigness. But the other hand, he at least opened it up beyond the local to, like, again, those things that are done. But what subsidiarity would show is that most things, to your point, are handled best at the local. They are, you know, but this is revolutionary stuff.
I mean, I
don't think it's an adjustment. It's an overhaul. It's like brain hemispheric stuff. We're not just shifting emphasis from one quadrant to another. We're shifting which has priority and which is secondary.
Yeah, I think that's right. Very much so. Yeah, I mean,
what I'm thinking though is with the post-liberals, right? Like, we're just going to get our guys in there. They're not reimagining a damn thing.
No,
they're just playing the same game, different. You know, it's just like American politics, right? It's the same damn thing. Whereas, and I think when you're talking about, you know, enchantment, for me, enchantment starts with a kind of phenomenological disposition towards things. And actually, the thing I've been thinking about all summer until now is, and this is what I'm trying to, I mean, even house church is an example of this, is we have to think that if a phenomenological disclosure of Christian truth is not possible, then maybe Christian truth is not possible. You know, then maybe it's just a set of aphorisms, and
that's going to be called Martin's wager. That's going to be your wager. That's going to be
Martin's wager.
Yeah, Martin's wager. Remind me of that, because I'll forget it. But it's going to go down as Martin's wager.
Martin's wager. But
we were here, Adam. We were here when Mike and Ol invited Martin's wager. Go ahead.
But don't you think that otherwise all it is you know, signing your name to a set of well, dogmas or whatever you're going to call them, right?
Yeah.
I agree. Do you sign? Do you agree to? Yes, I'll do this. Fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. Yes, I'm going to do that. Get a spiritual father. Got it. Check. Right. But those are external, right? And so, is it possible to disclose Christian truth through a contemplative relationship with things? You know, a phenomenological disclosure of where it reveals itself to you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's, you know, who cares? I mean, I do like that, because I think if that happens, and this is a classic thing in theology, right? The mystics versus the theologians.
Yeah, right.
Right. But I think what was interesting for me in phenomenology through Husserl and through Heidegger, for sure, is that was at least a moment in Edith Stein where the mystics and the theologians became the same person in a way, right? Because then you can return to form, and hopefully it won't become an island.
But mysticism is getting more incarnational. That was the purpose of me sending you that quote, Michael Martin. I'll read it for Adam, that, Thomas Merton, the beginning of mysticism is really out there. Merton saw everybody in a consumer district of Louisville shining like the sun. And this is echoed in this quote I sent to Michael as a text this week from Saint Mother Maria of Paris, an Orthodox saint. The churching of life, I love churching, not Christianity. And this is what I think it's all about, is the realization of the whole world is one great church adorned with icons, persons who should be venerated, honored, and loved, because these icons are true images of God that have the holiness of the living God within them. Again, the incarnation, the increasing incarnation from icons to faces. And that's Illich through and through, the human body sitting next to me. Tell me, Adam. Yeah, your answers are going to be more interesting than anything I'd say.
Well, I mean, that just brings up so many thoughts, and it just sends me back into the tension that we were talking about, and then I'm constantly, trying to think through. So something like that, like Merton standing in the commercial district and seeing all of these shoppers with their faces shining. On the one hand, that's where it should be. That's where it's at. Yes, I recognize that is
taking them out of being consumers to individual human persons, unrepeatable human persons.
Yeah. On the other hand, if what that means is, I mean, and Merton wouldn't say that this is what that means, but if the implication of that to us is that, oh, well, it's fine if everybody's just a mindless consumer walking around, because, if you see them right, their faces are shining.
Good point. It's a really good point. Right.
And, I think that some of the attraction that we were talking about of the post-liberals and others like them, or people who are talking about reenchantment, is to say, yes, even if you're just a mindless shopper, still, you incarnate the presence of God or something. The response to that ought to be, I might think, to try and make the world more beautiful, and less of a commercial district, which is not.
But the other one would be, I'm always thinking now of prayer being, instead of like bouncing off a satellite, hey, God, help this person. If we developed through the inner resources the ability to look at people like they're shining like the sun, through, there's a way that turns the people into the thing you're observing, right? That's Goethean science.
Yeah.
And I think we're taking away this, that's the whole Pausian critic of like everything except this story of the Good Samaritan having the presence of like a kind of a jealous God above it, right? So how about doing good because it's good?
Yeah.
Let's stop worshiping the God of thunderbolts. How about the victims of thunderbolts and things like that? As you know, Adam, from reading my stuff, this is the direction I think it's all coming.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really good point, that seeing people's faces as they really are can have its own independent effect.
Loving somebody into existence.
Yeah. Loving somebody into
resurrection. Practice resurrection.
Yeah. Wendell Berry, practice resurrection. But I just think that there is room to talk about how we order the world, how we set up spaces, how we
absolutely,
what our buildings look like, what our cities look like, these kinds of, I guess you could call it mundane things, where we think that precisely because the material world is like an incarnation of the spirit, if we think about it in that kind of sacramental way, precisely because of that, we're moved not only to love other people, but to love the actual materials that we're working with enough to make them into something beautiful, this kind of thing. So I guess I would just I see a tendency sometimes to emphasize that kind of seeing the face is shining so much that you think that the other stuff kind of like doesn't matter. Agreed. Which to me just kind of feeds into the order that is all around us, where that order is built on the idea that material things don't matter except as means to our own kind of desire, to satisfying our own kind of desires. So yeah, I want to bring those two things together.
It's kind of bringing them together is something that I learned at the monastery, is that mundane that mundane living with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like think of the city as choosing people who are just like you, certainly politically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what Stephen Vincent called imperial provincialism. You know, go to New York City and you spin the color wheel and it's gray and everybody looks different, but they all find people who totally agree with them on politics.
Mm-hmm.
But to live in a hamlet of hemlock, localism, you're going to be engaging in phronesis, you know, people who think differently than you. And then certainly at a monastery, the only thing these guys had in common was being Catholic. But you can't run from them at all. It's like a very large nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
And then you work it out. And then you know, at least the goal of monasticism in that way is from not running from somebody, you have that same experience of Merton that he had in the consumer district, that under these robes that look exactly the same, you see all those faces shining like the sun. And that kind of brings together shopcraft as soulcraft with something, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then, you know, in the monastery, you're also doing together with these people that you have to learn to live with, you're also doing all these mundane things. You know, we have a casket building monastery. You're building the caskets or whatever the craft is that you all practice, or just the work of the monastery. And yeah, exactly. That's the idea, is to bring those two things together. You know, I've said before, like, I feel like I'm a strange person to give this talk on enchantment. And maybe the reason is like of those two things, I've often, you know, mainly focused on the second one. Like the mundane stuff has seemed important enough for me to not think so much about the metaphysical stuff that is intellectually interesting but not experientially or something. But now I'm becoming more interested or more drawn experientially to that other thing too. But I'm still, I want to make sure it's grounded and, you know, connected to the concrete that's all around me. And I guess that's just a constant challenge, but yeah.
I would be curious for somebody like you, is that have you read, say, Owen Barfield's Saving the Appearances?
No, I'm not.
So that's, you know, it's very intense, but it's not heady, but it's very logical. It's British. But that lays out the schema of original participation through alienation, through what's called final participation, which is the Steinerian schema. And it's exactly applicable from infancy in the womb to alienation to, you know, some final type of cause that draws us forward. But so, you know, when I said metaphysics, you know, we have Hegel and everything. My college students would just call it circle, line, circle, right? Where the second circle is the line crossing the circle.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Then, like, we see it in movies. We watched Tom Hanks' News of the World, and the young girl who was tied to the native, she saw the world as a circle. Tom Hanks was a cowboy, and they just said line, line, line. It's there in this great Last Unicorn that Tara and I sing the praises of. It's like the best fantasy outside of Tolkien. But I guess that's what I mean by metaphysics. It's almost like a simple template. It's just like too easy, you know?
Yeah.
The more Adam becomes Adam, the more he feels at one in a crowd. It's the womb restored at a higher level. It's a community and oneness at the same time. It's the Trinity, you know?
Yeah. I mean, eventually things do get resolved. I guess that's maybe a core faith of mine.
Interesting. So what else you, let's, it's all like news as we'll wind up. You know, last time you were on, and this is all going to relate because the technological question is part of your political critique. And we're just talking about making things real, getting connected to the real. This summer, last time we spoke with you, you had an experiment. Name the experiment again as you would describe it, and tell us what you learned.
Yeah. So I had students sign up for a May term course, which is a month long. And the students in the course, there weren't very many of them, but, you know, it was just the first time. They lived together in a dorm room, apartment building, I guess, with no technology for the month, while they were also taking this course on these kind of, like we read Illich, these kinds of people in the course. But then they were also, you know, experimenting with living without their devices. So they had, I mean, I left it actually open. I said the fundamental rule is no smartphones, but you all can decide amongst yourselves how far you want to go. And they decided basically to no screens at all. I mean, I thought maybe it would be nice if they watched movies together, for example, had like a common screen, but they elected to go without screens at all. So for the whole month, they traded in their smartphones for flip phones. No TV, no Netflix, nothing. They did all their work on, you know, by hand. So the work for the course, they didn't need a computer for. And yeah, by the end of the month, they Yeah, it was quite profound.
Wow.
They one of the most interesting things that they said, and one thing I should say is these students probably pretty self-selecting. They're already interested, in the issue.
Sure.
So they didn't have to be pulled, dragging and screaming into the dorm. They wanted to try this. So that caveat aside, um, one of the most interesting things they said was that it was much easier than they thought it would be. And that people talk about tech addiction, you're addicted to your phone or whatever. And they decided that they were not. They were like, it wasn't an addiction, just a bad habit. And one of the insights that I thought was interesting was, and I'd never really thought about this, but it's possible that a lot of times when we, including me, talk about this problem of getting addicted to your technology, we're actually kind of like playing into the hands of the people we say we're against. Like we're blowing it up into this problem that is so bad. Like, oh, well, it's an addiction. I probably can't do anything about that. I might as well just keep going. Whereas if it's not something like that drastic for most people, then it's much more you can address it, and that's what they did. And they came out and they said I don't know what they're doing now. Several of them I haven't seen for this semester yet, but several of them last I talked had decided to keep going without a smartphone. They're just going to use their flip phone, and they picked up new interests. One guy took up the mandolin, spent his weekends at
a worthy undertaking.
Yeah,
Mandolin Michael.
Yeah, exactly. And he spent his weekends at bluegrass festivals, just like going and like jamming with people and things. And
that's what I used to do when I was a kid.
Well, that's what more people used to do when they were a kid. Not that in particular, but
right.
Something like that. And we talked a lot about this, but how this is going to sound so nostalgic, but people don't.
We're older than you are,
as much as they used to.
They don't do things.
They don't do things. They
don't.
They don't. Like when I was in college, we were always organizing our own things, like stupid stuff, crazy things. And we were
cow tipping.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, climbing up the radio tower and putting flags on top and stuff like you're supposed to do when you're a kid. And my sense is the kids just, they don't have much of a life like that. And I think one of the things that the kids in the dorm discovered was just how to do that, I guess, how to make your own fun, when you have to. So yeah, it was cool. And I wrote a little bit about it afterwards for Christian Scholars Review, wrote the blog for Christian Scholars Review, and just, arguing the case for more of this kind of thing, more of these kinds of experiments. So my hope is I actually have put together a working group of faculty from my college, and then we've got 3 colleges in the area. So the 2 other colleges got some other faculty. We're trying to come up with more ideas like this and trying to build some kind of constituency for, I don't know whether it's another tech, like a permanent dorm option maybe, or student clubs where people who want to reduce their tech use kind of get together and go out and do things together they don't require the use of technology.
Nice.
Who knows, but that's where we are. So.
Well, I had that same experience with students.
Really
I always ask them, how many of you can play an instrument?
Yeah.
Nobody. How many of you do whatever? Go camping? Nobody.
Yeah.
My wife's a piano teacher, and she has 60 students, but 55 of them are just there for therapy, right? They just talk, and their parents are even in there with them, and they just talk. And the parents don't change a thing, that my daughter needs to kind of unload, because the daughter's getting dropped off after soccer and before theater practice for her piano lesson. Yeah. And again, piano lessons are doing well. Piano players are not doing well, right?
When I say they don't do anything, I don't mean they're not busy. They're super busy. They're too busy, but they're not doing anything informal on their own. They're not sitting around talking about philosophy or metaphysics.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think tech is a big part of that. So that's behind my idea, but yeah. One of the really interesting, so I wrote this article, and so I had a group of faculty who are also interested in, kind of helped me plan it, and we're talking together about issues. Anyway, one of the professors, she's in the seminary here. She shared my article on her Facebook page, and she then shared with me several of the comments that she got on the article, and they were scathing.
Really?
Yeah.
Say more. Oh no, no.
It was really very interesting and revealing. I mean, I don't know. My idea is like, who could disagree with this, right?
Yeah, right.
Maybe you don't want to do this, and maybe you're just like, I recognize that you're right, but I'm not going to do it, or it won't work, or something like that. But no, these comments were like they were offended by the argument.
Really?
Yeah.
Which makes me want to revisit your use of the word like addiction there, Adam, is to say that the people who did
maybe.
this, it was the people who did this knew that they also already had a free enough relationship.
Yeah.
That like put 100 people in a room with like this much marijuana, you know, a certain percent are going to get addicted. They're the ones who aren't going to go in the tech-free dorm.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who, in seeing that people can live without this, say like, you know, you're telling me, you know, that's just a possibility, but it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not denying that some people might be addicted. My only point was that maybe not everybody is.
Right. It's what Illich again calls distality from tools. It's some people, it's not too hard to say, well, this is good for, and it makes me think again of Aquinas, I brought up in the last one, this very useful heuristic of we need to love the things that are above us and know the things that are below us. So if technology, if you can see that it's below you, that's fine. Once you start to revere it, and there is a religion of technology, which is why to ignore it in a book of political theory, like you're saying, Deneen did, is kind of a big lacuna.
Yeah, it is, exactly. Yeah. And I guess what these comments showed me is that there's a religion of technology in the kind of superficial sense where everybody goes to the Steve Jobs unveiling of the next iPhone and oohs and ahs, and it's like you're at a service when you're bowing down to the aisle, something like that. But there's this other way in which, and this is what these comments suggested.
It's so funny. We used to do that with football in my liturgy classes when I was in grad school. The religion of now it's tech meetings.
Yeah, exactly. But football was probably a better religion than technology.
Yeah, right.
So one of the comments was from a person who was, I believe, since the professor who shared it is in the seminary, I think that these were seminary students of hers. Wow. I'm not sure about that, but it kind of it made sense a little bit based on how they talked. But one of them was very offended because she thought that it excluded I'm not sure if it's she or he, but anyway, they were disabled, and my argument did not take. I briefly mentioned something about, the objection. What about people with disabilities who use technology to overcome their disabilities? And she thought that I was very dismissive toward people with disabilities and how they rely on technology. Basically, all the comments were all about how if you do something like this, where you try to, kind of reorganize space and time. We're talking about institutions, right? Like the medium that we live in. If you try to reform the medium so that maybe they're more directed toward the value that they're intended to serve, that you're going to end up excluding some people, and any exclusion is always bad.
Yeah, that gets your idea of values.
Yeah, exactly.
Or rights. I mean, that's a right. That's a
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And I was going to say, you could say like neurodivergent people, this way of living, and then your whole program is shot through.
Yes,
right?
Exactly right. And it leads full circle back to what we were talking about before, like with the rights versus values. Any appeal to some value that you're trying to instantiate by setting up a particular, a certain way of doing things. It's a way of living together. We're saying we're going to do it this way and not that way. You're going to exclude some people, and that is felt as a violation of rights by those people.
And Michael, that would want you to make you pick up your Pat Deneen pitchfork and join the post-liberal thing, right?
Exactly.
To me, it's very understandable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Whenever I encounter something like that,
you see something so good that's just like somebody says you can't do this because somebody might be offended. And it's not super shallow post-liberalism, but I do understand these people.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand them the most whenever I'm reading comments like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
What a conversation. Adam, again, I don't mind saying what I think, but like you're a very, very, very important thinker.
Oh, well,
and
thank you.
writer.
I
And
hope
it's
I get
very
to do some
unassuming,
more
your
thinking.
work. You put it in book reviews at Front Porch. I mean, with the insights of your 2 articles, again, very humble, useful, but this type of I'll send people a link to those, but you can learn so much from these 2 book reviews
Thank
about
you.
politics in our time. And it's I would wonder, like, you're just thinking in real time. And I can't wait to have you on again. Thanks for all you're doing. And do you want to tell people how they can read your stuff? I'll link to the Front Porch things, other things you want to kind of put up there for people. Let them know now.
Yeah, I mean, the Front Porch thing is the main thing. Maybe I'll also send you a link to the article about the tech-free dorm
Yeah,
if anybody wants to read that. I mean, at Front Porch, I'm in one of the associate editors now for Front Porch.
Great. Oh wow.
All right.
So I don't know how much I'll be writing for them. Actually, I might be a little too busy doing editing, but
Sure.
But that's probably where I'll end up. I keep intending to get back to the Substack, but like I said, now we have the 3rd child on the way.
Yeah. Michael and I have both been there.
Yeah,
it's a different world for me. I don't know if I've said it here, but I was telling a young dad the other day. He's got 3 kids under 5.
Mm-hmm.
The real sense of liberation didn't come until winter in upstate New York, when I could tell my 4 kids, we had 4 kids in 5 years, that like, get on your winter clothes and get in the car. So there's no more car seats and no more putting their boots on or so much as a mitten or helping them look to find anything.
Yeah.
In the winter, when I said get in the car, I just thought, like, much more than my youngest just graduating from college, much more than anything. I was liberated as a man. And it's very difficult until then and beyond, but it's difficult, but it's the best work ever.
Yeah, it is. It is very much. It's very difficult, but it is the most important thing that's ever happened. So yeah. Yep.
Well, thanks everybody. And people, Jesus the Imagination, where can they buy it, Michael? The new issue.
Well, you can get it. I would recommend going to the Angelica website to get it, because they found a way to go outside of the man and not have to get it through Amazon. So do that. But it's also on Amazon. It's also at Barnes and Noble. I'm sure it's other places as well.
Okay. And I'll do as I always do. I'll link to your Patreon and Substack. And we will see everybody here again, the Regeneration Podcast, next week.